Cardinal Wilfrid Napier stirred controversy when he made a statement in an interview with the BBC that pedophile priests are mentally ill and should not be prosecuted. We are joined today by Joey Piscatelli to discuss the Cardinal's comment.
It's much bigger than what you see in the news. What you see in the news isn't just the tip of the iceberg, it's the tip of the tip of the iceberg. I've been doing this for 12 years, advocating for clergy abuse victims, and I can tell you that more than 90% of people that have been abused never make a claim.
Last week, we were honored to hear about the marriage equality bill moving through legislation in Minnesota from Senator Scott Dibble. This week, we welcome special guest Ben Nelson to share his story about marriage rights being revoked when he moved across state lines.
I believe there's 1,100 different rights that the federal government gives to married couples, something that obviously is not recognized for my husband and myself.
Yes.
Kind of disappointing. So if something happens, do I get his pension or part of it, or does he get part of mine? Also different assets that are involved as well, being able to transfer those assets, something that, as part of a marriage would happen.
My name is Neil Harbison. I've been accepted as a cyborg by a government. I received a lot of letters from people around the world that wanted to extend their senses. So we founded the Cyborg Foundation. We help people become cyborgs. We also defend the cyborg rights, and we promote the use of cybernetics as part of our body.
There is a new movement to integrate technology into the human experience, to create cyborgs. But where is the line between technology being used to accentuate the human experience and the result being another source of dehumanization?
The Mormon Church has updated scriptures in the book titled Doctrines and Covenants. Today we discuss how religious scripture changes throughout time.
News about the sequester cuts have been everywhere. But how can we look at these cuts to understand what we value as a culture? And if we did, would we like what we see?
The fear of being openly pagan has control over some pagans' lives. Today we will discuss the value of pagan pride for all minority religions.
Following the selection of Pope Francis I, South African Cardinal Wilfrid Napier hit the headlines because of a comment he made during a BBC radio interview with Stephen Nolan, where he suggested that priests who molest children have a psychological condition who don't deserve to be punished for their actions.
Well, look, what is pedophilia? It's a condition, it's a psychological condition, it's a disorder. What do you do with disorders? You've got to try and put them right. If I, as a normal being, choose to break the law, knowing that I'm breaking the law, then I think I need to be punished. But if you tell me that somebody who's got a psychological condition, from my experience, pedophilia is actually an illness. It's not a criminal condition, it's an illness. I know of at least 2 of the priests who became pedophiles, who had themselves been abused as children. Now, don't tell me that those people are criminally responsible like somebody who chooses to do something like that. I don't think you can really take the position and say that person deserves to be punished.
Responding to the public uproar over his comments, Napier quickly went into damage control by saying that he had botched the interview and that he believes, quote, "As every dictionary consulted confirms, pedophilia is a medical condition. What is a crime is the sexual abuse of children. Therefore, pedophilia must be treated. What must be punished is the crime of sexual abuse of children." In a 2012 National Catholic Register article, Reverend Benedict Groeschel, who is a prominent Roman Catholic spiritual leader who has spent decades counseling priests and is the author of 45 books, stated about priests sexually abusing children that in, quote, "a lot of cases, the youngster, 14, 16, 18, is the seducer. He added that he was, quote, inclined to think that priests who were first-time abusers should not be prosecuted because, quote, their intention was not committing a crime. His comments also created a public uproar, and later that week, his comments were removed from the National Catholic Register website, and he released a comment that stated, quote, a priest or anyone else who abuses a minor is always wrong and is always responsible. And then added that, quote, my mind and my way of expressing myself are not as clear as they used to be. I think that both of these statements are interesting because neither of these two men are some obscure rogue Catholic priests. They are central figures in the church who are very savvy and accustomed to being in the media. So for each of them to say that they somehow misspoke is disingenuous. I think that both of them let their guard down a bit and expressed the mindset surrounding pedophilia and sexual abuse of children that has become part of the culture of the church leadership. To help us make better sense of this, we are joined today by Joey Piscatelli, who is the director of the Northern California office of the Support Network for Those Abused by Priests, also known as SNAP. Joey is a sexual abuse victims advocate and writer and is the only openly pagan individual to ever win a court case against the Catholic Church. Joey, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about what happened to you.
I entered Salesian High School in Richmond, California when I was about 13, and I was a runt. I weighed about probably 70 pounds. And almost immediately, the vice principal of the school started to groom me, what they call grooming, where he gets to know you and invites you to places. And he first took me to the boys' club and masturbated in front of me and made me watch, and another priest witnessed it. And then after that, it escalated until finally he violently raped me at the school. Years later, when the window opened in California in 2003, I sued the school and the priest for child molestation, and I actually went to court. I am the only one in my county who went to court. All of the other claims of abuse were settled out of court, except for mine, because I was an advocate and a leader for abuse victims who fought with the Catholic Church. So I ended up going to a high appellate court and winning that as well. And in the meantime, I've talked to several hundred child abuse victims of the church who had to sue or do something because the church was not taking care of abuse victims.
So there was another priest in the room?
Yes, I went to the boys' club to play pool, and I was playing pool with the vice principal, Father Steve Whelan, and the leader of the boys' club, who was a cleric named Brother Sal, actually witnessed the incident where the priest was masturbating and told me not to leave to watch him. And I was scared, and this was new to me, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether to run, to call the police. I was just totally lost. And the other cleric who was watching was actually best friends with this priest, and the cleric who was watching is a convicted felony child abuser himself. And so that enabled me to sue because of negligence. It goes towards something they call the notice issue. In other words, if someone at the school or the church knows or should have known that you were being endangered, they should have done something about it, therefore they're negligent. And I won the lawsuit on those grounds.
Now, is it true that the priest who raped you is still teaching at that same school?
Yeah. I recently did a protest because that priest was chosen to be on a documentary video about the sacred wine. That's the wine they use in the Mass that they call the blood of Christ. That priest was chosen. Now, this is after I beat him in court and he lost. He was chosen to represent the Catholic Church's blood of Christ, sacred sacramental wine. And he's in a video on the internet. It's called Urban Legend. And they chose him to represent the blood of Christ. Now, this is a child rapist. So I was protesting at the church in San Francisco where he was about him being chosen to represent the Catholic Church's blood of Christ. And they told me that he was transferred back to the school where he molested me.
We see stories about the sex abuse crisis in the news seemingly almost every day. How big of an issue is this?
It's much bigger than what you see in the news. What you see in the news isn't just the tip of the iceberg, it's the tip of the tip of the iceberg. I've been doing this for 12 years, advocating for clergy abuse victims, and I can tell you that more than 90% of people that have been abused never make a claim, never go to a lawyer, never go to the police. Most of them do nothing. So what you see in the media, and like in California here, for instance, on the West Coast, it's very, very small number of people who have been abused, and that goes worldwide. And it's just like in Ireland now, there's barely any priests, and nobody's going to church anymore because Ireland was historically a supplier of clergy all over the world, and they're finding out in Ireland that it was rampant. So the story is much, much bigger than what you see on the news or in the media.
Well, Joey, thank you very much for joining us today.
Okay, it was really nice talking to you.
So one of the things that I thought was really interesting in doing the research on this as well, there was an article that was in Newsweek that was looking at the question of whether there are kind of a higher percentage of pedophiles within the Catholic Church than in the population as a whole. And what the article stated is that no, it's about the same percentage. 4.5% is what they reported, either in the Catholic Church or in the population as a whole. But there are a couple of things that kind of came to light in my conversation with Joey, is that the people who funded that study were actually members of the Catholic Church. And so whether that article is could be considered biased or unbiased, I mean, nobody really knows, right? But I think irregardless, the fact of the matter is that the church is supposed to be a sanctuary. I mean, that's supposed to be a place that is safe, that is not like the rest of the world, and that priests are supposed to be seen as the most safe people in the world, that you can bring your certainly are not going to be abusing kids. And so I think that I think that that the idea that that this is supposed to be just kind of expected because it happens outside of the church, I find to be a little bit disturbing.
Yes, and speaking to the first commentary in this, with it being a mental illness, pedophilia being a mental illness, and sexually abusing children as a crime, that's definitely valid. Absolutely, but it doesn't mean that it excuses the crime because Correct. It is a mental illness. That's like saying because I mass murdered many, many people, I have a mental illness, so don't prosecute
me.
Don't prosecute me. So that doesn't even remotely make sense or excuse the behavior, and they've excused it for years, and they thought they could treat it as a mental illness and put these priests back out into the church again and again, and they committed the same crimes because it is a mental illness and it's not curable. And
the key is that you don't expose kids to opportunities where these priests can act out. And I think the fact that there are pedophiles in the church, in the Catholic Church, is not necessarily as much of an issue. Is the fact that there has been a whole program to try to protect the priests.
Yes.
instead of protecting the vulnerable kids.
The children, because
The
essentially
children.
when they put the priests back out into the church, they're
Right.
just subjecting them to all these new victims.
Right.
They're just instead of protecting the kids by saying, now we're not going to allow this man to be in front of this church because we know his history, they're saying, well, we've cured him, we've taken care of him, or we've
Right.
attempted to, so we're going to put him back out there.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense. It's not protecting, again, the victims, and it's also not healing the people they've abused. It's not healing the children that they've abused. They're concentrating on trying to heal an abuser.
Right, right.
Makes no sense.
And the last piece, and the population who is impacted by this that really doesn't get talked about much, I think, are the average churchgoers.
Yes.
Because there are a lot of people who grew up in a Catholic home, and they volunteer at the soup kitchen. They try to do good work. And what is really a tragedy about this whole thing is that, they kind of end up getting, getting lumped in, by proxy.
Yeah.
With this whole scandal, and I think that's unfortunate, and I think it's a real betrayal of, of their faith.
Yes.
And their own spiritual journey to have the leadership of that organization. I think it's important to distinguish that this is not the average everyday Catholic out there, but at the kind of the higher rankings within the leadership that this kind of stuff is happening, and it's just unfortunate. So, well, we will be back with more of the Pagan Voice in just a moment.
Last week, we were honored to have Senator Scott Dibble share information about the marriage equality bill for Minnesota. Today, we have Ben Nelson here to share his story about marrying his husband. Ben moved to Minnesota after marrying his husband in California. The change in location meant the marriage rights they once had were no longer recognized by the state. So welcome, Ben. We're so glad to have you on the show today.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Can you tell me just a little bit about the transition from California to Minnesota for you?
Well, that was kind of an exciting transition in my life. It's great to be able to move to a different state or move back home, because this is where I'm originally from, and to be able to finally get started in my nursing career, which is something that I put many years into. So moving to Minnesota was exciting, to be able to take my partner or my husband and myself and move across the country. But there was also concerns that we had when looking into employment and making sure that we could be able to provide health care, something that wouldn't transfer over with our marriage not being recognized in this state.
So when you were married in California, what was that experience like? Because I know it was around the time of the shift in the law there. Right? Can you tell me about that too?
It definitely was. I've been with Steve for many years now, and it was about 5 days before they were going to vote on the marriage amendment, or to Proposition 8 is what it was called. Mm-hmm. And we kind of had been thinking about it for a while and kind of had to act on it. So it was exciting to be able to get a brother and sister-in-law together and go to the courthouse and do the marriage there, and to be able to get our license. But it was one of those things that we had to consider. We had 5 days left to do it because we weren't sure if the public was going to vote away our rights. And unfortunately that happened.
And then when that happened, so I guess that kind of was confusing for me and still is. Mm-hmm. So previous to that law being switched or Proposition 8 happening, mm-hmm. What was lost in that, or anything? If you got married before that went through, did you retain those rights or did you lose them?
We're actually one of the 18,000 couples that actually have a special privilege at this point to be able to be married. So we have the rights and are legally recognized as a married couple in the state of California, where a lot of our friends aren't able to do that right now, and kind of a second class with a domestic partnership, not an actual marriage at this point.
And do you see a conflict in the terminology, if it's called a marriage or if it's called a civil union or if it's called a domestic partnership? What's your take on the terminology?
That's kind of a tough one, and I've actually thought about that one quite a bit over the years. In some respects, it really doesn't matter what it's called. It's the union that we have that's special to us. But at the same point, if we want to be able to have marriage equality, I think being able to call it a marriage and calling it what it is would be nice to be able to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when you came over here came over to Minnesota, came back to the Midwest, your
Yes,
home base,
yes.
and you had the marriage rights.
Yes.
What was your biggest concern other than healthcare?
Well, healthcare obviously was the biggest concern, but also there's financial concerns as well, or being able to see Steve in the hospital if something were to happen. In the event of different legal status, if there was a divorce, not that we'd ever want that to happen, but there's a legal limbo that you're kind of stuck in where you can't do that here, you'd have to move back to a different state, something that's just not really fair. So a lot of little concerns, most of them not a major concern, but something to be considered.
So kind of stuff that anybody that's heterosexual would just never have to be concerned with.
So true. I believe there's 1,100 different rights that the federal government gives to married couples, something that obviously is not recognized for my husband and myself.
Yes.
Kind of disappointing.
Absolutely it is. Also, along the lines of the financials and moving into that, what are the benefits that you receive or don't receive?
Some of the benefits, it's nice to be able to say my husband. It's a wonderful term. I love him dearly, and it's nice to be able to acknowledge that publicly. So some of the financial benefits then are being able to file taxes together. Specifically when I was in nursing school and I wasn't working, we'd have been able to get the tax benefit there. So one of the ones that was a concern, being able to have pension benefits. So if something happens, do I get his pension or part of it, or does he get part of mine? Also different assets that are involved as well, being able to transfer those assets. Something that, as part of a marriage would happen, but not always as domestic partnership or just as a couple.
Yes.
One of the things I think is really interesting in the terminology around that is even the term marriage itself has this implication of two becoming one, where partnerships, by their definition, there's a separateness, but it's a business exchange, and it seems that even though the relationship itself is still one where there's that sense of union, for the public to not be able to use that word marriage, it's almost as though society as a whole is unwilling just to recognize that union, that is so much a part of your life. But if it was a heterosexual relationship, then that's fine.
Right.
That's fine.
Well, and wherever you go, people understand what a marriage is.
Right.
If you have to describe what a partnership is, that's not something people, like you said, understand right away. Is it a business? Is it a loving couple?
Right. Right.
Absolutely. I found actually something that came up for me talking about the financials is I've heard people that are against same-sex marriage speak to, well, those gays, they just want to be able to get the financial benefits.
Oh my.
Have you heard that before?
I have heard that, and I'm a little disappointed.
Isn't that, it's so erroneous.
Definitely.
Well, of course, then they deserve the same financial benefits.
That's right. They're out there, and it's part of equality. We should be able to have those as well.
Absolutely.
I also look at the benefit to society that we have. If anything happens to my husband, I'm there to be able to provide for him. It's not a burden of the state or society at that point.
Right.
And vice versa, if something would happen to me. Hopefully it doesn't.
Yes,
Right.
Especially being that you guys are both in fields that are about caretaking and
Yes.
service to society.
Yes. And giving back to others.
Yes.
Something we enjoy to do.
One of the things that has always surprised me, last year we had this amendment in Minnesota where they were trying to put a constitutional amendment in place to permanently ban any legislation that would allow gay marriage in the state of Minnesota. And fortunately, that was defeated.
Yes.
But during those conversations, one of the things that really surprised me is how many people felt that the institution of marriage itself was under attack, or that it somehow would illegitimize marriage by allowing people of the same sex to marry. What was your experience going through that?
Sometimes it's a little disappointing knowing that other people could try to vote away what I feel is a right that I should have, or an equal right. But we've been married now for 4.5 years, and I don't see anyone who's been hurt by our marriage. if anything, it's been a benefit and made our family stronger, drawn us together, made us more complete. It's pretty awesome.
Do you do any kind of public education, work or advocacy work or anything like that, or how do you do anything to help, to just kind of bring out the whole discussion around same-sex marriage, or do you just,
personally,
not really?
Personally, I do like to educate my friends and family, make sure they understand, my position on the subject. This is how it's benefited myself. This is how it can benefit you. It's important for them to understand not just what they see on the news, but to incorporate what they read and also what their feelings are. Is this something that's right, something that should be allowed? So it's important for me to do that. Also talking with people at work. I've come across a couple coworkers that have said, you shouldn't have the right to be married. And to be able to ask, was that a faith-based decision? Is this something you've been told? What's your understanding of what this is?
So I know with your friends and family, you say that you do some education with them. What are some of the more common questions that people ask you?
Well, one of them that I've heard is, what about procreation? If you're not able to procreate, should you be able to have a marriage? That's what it's based on. And to be able to remind them that, not all couples choose to have children, and not all couples are actually able to have children. So it's kind of one of the things with us. We are a couple. We may not be able to have children, but that doesn't negate or change our marriage or our love for each other.
And are you guys interested in adoption or anything of that nature?
It's something that we've considered. At this point, probably not ready to do that, but it's nice to know that there's an option if that's something we'd like to do. To know that's something I've already discussed with family, and they support the idea. They'd love to see that happen if we choose to do that. It's kind of nice.
Absolutely. So with your education within your own community, do you find more resistance with the education, or do you see people soften around the topic?
Once you understand a little bit more, after you talk to them, do people change their minds much? Or?
Sometimes. There are people that will want to openly discuss it with you. There are people that already have preconceived notions and have already made their decision that is something that they don't agree with. But I have been able to help educate people and have them change their mind, which is kind of nice. At the same time, it's nice to understand what their position is and to be more understanding and accepting on my own side as well of why they have the beliefs that they hold.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's it for now. Do you have any ending notes or anything else you want to say on the topic?
Just at this point, it's been awesome to be in an 8-year relationship, and love my husband very much and look forward to many years to come.
Well, thank you for joining us, Ben.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.
We'll be back with more from the Pagan Voice. The Mormon Church has updated some of its scriptures in the book titled Doctrines and Covenants. Doctrines and Covenants is filled with writings from Joseph Smith and other prophets that claim to have messages directly from God. LDS leaders have made changes to the scripture and stamped an earlier fabricated date on it. This brings to mind the effects that current politics, political correctness, and the evolution have contributed to all religious scripture. And at what point do we consider specific man-made concepts to be outdated?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. To answer that in a sentence or less, I think when they stop serving to really help us understand our relationship with the divine and help us, really help us live effectively in the world as it is today. I think along this, the Mormon thing that was kind of interesting was that this followed Romney's campaign, where a lot of the beliefs that Mormons hold, or at least some Mormons hold, with like polygamy and some things like that, were used against him. And so I think that in this political climate, I think that there is, seeing what happened with Romney's campaign, I think there was some motivation to try to bring that a little bit more into the, kind of into the new century.
Yeah, and actually it brings up for me too is the thought process behind keeping God out of government, right? And many times these scriptures were written as a way of governing the people and keeping people in alignment with law. Well, in our country, we have law for that. Religion is something separate. So I think it's something that we're playing with, and it is evolving, and it's becoming something different. As the more we have God out of the government, the more we see the government have law, and religious and faith have their own practice, so to speak.
Well, there was an interesting statement that was made by the head of the ACLU, who was both an ordained minister and was also an attorney who was a member of the U.S. Supreme Court bar. And so he was in a position to talk a lot about these church and state issues. And one of the things that he talked about is that it's actually good to have that separation, because when you talk about philosophy and what it means to be human and all of those types of things, those are very different questions than things around like whether gays should marry. You know, that's much more of a governance type thing, and really should be separate. It should be a separate question from the religious aspects of things.
Yes, and then it's something where you're looking at the simple laws of the universe or spiritual laws within each religion, and that's what you're following, rather than all of these other principles, all these other laws that are a little bit more about, governing the people, human rights, etc. And then we don't have to keep updating scripture. Right? Because if we break it down to simple laws, we don't have to keep changing them because they already exist.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that differentiates paganism, I think, from a lot of other traditions. So the Gnostic traditions, which are Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, all have these scriptures that are passed down, whether it's the Torah, whether it's the Bible, whether it's the Quran or the Upanishads. All of them have this scripture that came from thinkers from a long time ago who had revelations and put these down into code. In paganism, we don't have that, and sometimes because of that, we are dismissed as not a real religion because we don't have a book. But we don't have a book because our focus is much different. In paganism, there's much more of a focus on the individual's experience as it is revealed to that individual. And we are referred to as a mystery religion because of that, or a group of religions. Paganism actually is a group of different faith paths. But it's much more of a focus on the individual and supporting that individual in their quest. We have teachings and philosophies, but no book that is like a blanket statement for everybody.
And it makes such a difference because it's as if the book is being written as we go.
That's exactly right.
Through living experience.
That's exactly right.
Again, it comes back to that acknowledging that, people, I would like to think, are inherently good. So as long as it's a coming back to what's in their heart, what's at the core, what are the values and principles that are at your core.
Right.
And letting that be your spiritual guide or your moral guide as you go along and experience life and have these different interactions, and creating new belief systems that at some point in your life may no longer serve you. I think we do a lot of that. We have belief systems that served us when we were 7, don't talk to strangers. Well, if you're 25 years old and you're still not talking to strangers, you have no friends. So belief systems... You can't
go to a job interview.
Exactly. Belief systems change. I think that's a cool thing about paganism without, not having those scriptures, not having that book, is that it allows you to create belief systems that are, positive to what you're experiencing now.
And it's not as though that those books cannot offer some kind of guidance and some kind of inspiration. Because I think all of the books that I mentioned from all of the Gnostic traditions, have some really good. They have some really good philosophy. Even though I'm pagan, one of the pieces, one of the teachings comes from St. Francis that I think about a lot. And that is, it's a long piece, but a little piece of that is, God may I seek to comfort than to be comforted. May I seek to understand rather than be understood. And where there is error, may bring the spirit of forgiveness. I mean, I think that speaks to a very nice way of being that really transcends any particular religion.
Absolutely.
So
coming back to those again, spiritual laws
that's
rather
right.
than the human heartfelt laws rather than focusing on man-made law of governance of that time.
Right.
To fit.
Right. Yeah. Well, speaking of values and all of that, the last piece that we're going to do in this episode is all about money and how we spend our money really is a reflection of our values. The reason why this is an important thing to talk about right now is, as you know, the government is going through this huge tax cut across the board known as the sequester. And one of the ways that we can understand our values as a society is to take a look at how we as a society spend our money. And we as a society spend our money through our tax dollars. So what the sequester really represents is it represents an opportunity for all of us to take a look at where are we spending our money, where are we cutting our money, and what does that tell us about ourselves as a society? And is this something we need to be concerned about? I mean, one of the things in particular that I will bring up is right now the oil companies, in particular ExxonMobil, for example, have been making just a tremendous amount of money. In fact, ExxonMobil currently has more money than all nations on earth with the exception of 7. So the fact that we are still giving ExxonMobil tax dollars in the form of a subsidy so that they can be more profitable while at the same time cutting out the children's school lunch program, I would suggest tells us something about our values as a society.
Yes, and what we value personally, and that is one of my personal frustrations with paying taxes, is that I don't have the power to choose where the money goes. Right. So I do with my vote.
Right.
I have that. But as far as everything else, I don't get to choose where that money goes, and it tends to be a personal rebellion within me that I get frustrated around this time of year about. But it is something that I would like to see a shift in where we do filter that money. Not only just with children's programs within the schools and things like that, but also just our roads.
Right.
I mean, our roads right now are pretty pitiful. I mean, in certain parts of the United States, I know Naples, Florida still looks pretty good, but in certain parts of the United States, the roads can't get repaired because the money's going elsewhere.
For example, the war in Iraq. There was just a study that came out that said that the total cost of that war is going to be $6 trillion. And when you put that into some kind of context, the entire annual budget for the U.S. Department of Education was approximately equivalent to the amount of money spent on the war in 1 month. And so when I hear politicians talk about how we need to cut these programs, we can't afford these entitlements, I have a hard time buying that, because if you really look at how much money is being spent on some of these other things, whether it's subsidies to oil companies, tax breaks for the wealthiest people, or for these wars, the money's there. Mm-hmm. The money is there. We have enough money to fund all of these things. It's just a matter of what do we value as individuals in our society. And one of the things that I would suggest to everybody who is watching this show, the people that are out on Capitol Hill, whether it's in Washington, D.C. or in your particular state, they want to hear from you. Most of the time, what those elected representatives hear from are lobbyists who are trying to get as many dollars for these other things as they can. And what we need is we need more citizen lobbyists who can become a part of that conversation about how our tax money is spent and where that money is going. So I would encourage you to please contact your senator, contact your representative, show up to Capitol Hill, every once in a while, write some letters, do something to become an active citizen.
Participate.
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 We'll be back in just a moment.
My name is Neil Harbison. I've been accepted as a cyborg by a government. I was born with achromatopsia, which means that I can only see in black and white. As a kid, I even doubted whether color existed or not. But the reality is that you cannot ignore color. Color is everywhere. At school, I memorized that the sky is blue, the grass is green, and lemons are yellow. But in 2004, my life changed. With Adam Montanden, we developed the iBorg, which transforms colors into notes. Then a new world started. Hearing colors changes the way you see everything. I started perceiving color through sound, and the iBorg soon became a part of my body. Until one day, I started hearing colors in my dreams. Then I understood what being a cyborg meant. It's not the union between the iBorg and my head what converts me into a cyborg, but the union between the software and my brain. My body and technology have united. The iBorg evolved from detecting just a few colors to detecting a scale of 360 based on human perception. I decided to extend this sense of color, so now I can perceive infrareds, and the next level is to perceive ultraviolets. There are many colors that humans cannot perceive. People either laugh at the iBorg or come and ask me what it is. Beautiful landscapes like the sea or nature don't sound so good as I was expecting. I really enjoy instead to perceive supermarkets because they sound so colorful and so stimulating. I enjoy painting music. Aquí, per exemple, hi ha Baby de Justin Bieber, traduïda a color. All painters have become composers. I enjoy making portraits from hearing the sound of well-known faces. Prince Charles, for example, despite what you might think, sounds really good. Now that I can perceive color, I still have social problems, but it's because of the electronic eye. I'm usually not accepted in cinemas because they think that I'm filming. They kick me out from supermarkets because they think that I'm doing something illegal. I received a lot of letters from people around the world that wanted to extend their senses. So we founded the Cyborg Foundation. We help people become cyborgs, we also defend the cyborg rights, and we promote the use of cybernetics as part of our body. It's very, very human to modify one's body with human creations. We develop different projects. A cybernetic nose to allow people perceive smells through electromagnetic signals. The Speedborg, which allows you to perceive the exact speed of any movement in front of you. During this century, we will see that more and more people will start using technology as a part of the body in order to perceive more and to extend senses. We will be able to understand better who we are and in which world we live in.
So what did you think of that?
My initial response is that that's really cool. Mm-hmm. My initial response is that it's helping a lot of people. It's allowing people that at one point didn't have all five senses, operating, that they can have that in some capacity. The second part of it to me is a little bit of, fear, my own fear, of wondering what's next with this and how far there's a detachment. So there's a way that this is very connecting, and then there's a way that there's a detachment from humanity with this. As we become more and more mechanical, we're less and less natural. So there's really positive, and then if somebody's irresponsible, I think there could be really, really negative outcomes.
There have been a number of stories on this, and during my research on this, I found some really interesting things. For one, Lockheed Martin is doing a lot of research into this. There's actually a whole cyborg suit that is called the Hulk, that is designed to attach to a soldier's body to give them extra strength. And so in their advertising, they talk about how somebody could carry 160 pounds, up 6,000 feet and not be winded at the top. And, you know, in some of those applications, I can see particularly, I don't know necessarily about, you know, militarizing the technology, but I could see certainly, you know, where there could be some advantages for rescuers. For example, in mountain climbing, things like that, if there are people that are trapped, having something like this where you can actually rescue people and things like that. I think that is great. There is a whole group of people who go way beyond with the cyborg thing, go way beyond just trying to overcome a deficit of, you know, of either sensation or motion, and really seek to replace the human body with a mechanical one. There was one gentleman in particular that I was listening to, and he was talking about how one day he hopes that he can have his mind transported into a completely mechanical body, so that he wouldn't have to experience, you know, the disease or the decay associated with being human. And that I thought was unfortunate.
And that's the fear that I have, is
Right.
that this could end up being a tool for people to disengage with other people. And I just, for me, what I really care about in life is my human experience.
Right.
And so much of that is, it is being able to have the sensation of touch.
Right.
You know, of any sorts. And if you're a mechanical thing, you're losing that energetic importance of human contact.
Absolutely. So what is so bad about the human experience itself? You know, I mean, we are here, we are of the divine to experience the world through our senses. And I can see if there's a deficit in one of those senses, wanting to try to compensate for that in some way. But to try to move beyond that, to create our experience of being non-human, just feels like it's another step in kind of a pattern of dehumanization and virtual reality that's emerging in our culture as a whole.
And also, like, why aren't we proud to be humans? Why aren't we
Right.
proud to just be here and say that we are imperfect?
Right.
We're perfectly imperfect, and that's part of the journey, is, you know, working through those different imperfections and seeing ourselves. And it's part of how we're relatable. We relate to one another because we're
Correct.
not perfect. We relate to one another because we have humanity, we have physical beingness, we have all of these things that allow us to be empathetic, allow us to be compassionate, allow us to
Right.
connect. And I feel like a lot of that could be lost within the way that this could go in an extreme direction. That could be lost.
Right.
So speaking of pride, perhaps it's the fear of persecution that has been passed down through generations, or an insecurity that has developed over time in an individual's life. But the fear of being openly pagan controls some people's lives. The fear of coming out of the broom closet is similar to the fear of coming out of the gay closet. And we have seen that only through exposure can the acceptance and respect for lifestyles that society painted as shameful at one moment in time can be healed.
Yeah, I think this is a really relevant topic for today in particular, because there has been a big movement in the pagan community, and a lot of pagans are not aware of this, where society as a whole is really starting to embrace who we are. A little simple thing that sounds like it's not a big deal, but it really is. It has huge implications. Is that even how pagan books are classified now in the libraries and in the bookstores are no longer in the occult section, but in the religious studies section. And that just happened within the last few months. There was the governor of North Carolina, who is a Tea Party Republican, actually included a pagan in 8 religious scholars when they established Religious Pluralism Month in the state. I mean, these are things where paganism is being accepted by the mainstream. But I think that a lot of people, kind of in their local communities, there's still a lot of fear about being fired from their job, about having kids taken away, and about being persecuted in some way for being pagan. And You know, just like you mentioned with the gay community, it wasn't until people stood up and said, yep, this is who I am, I'm your neighbor, I'm your friend, I'm nothing to fear, that things started to change.
You know, a lot of this is an example of fear that if I show who I really am, will the people around me still love and accept me?
Absolutely.
I think that's so much of why we hide ourselves, of anything about ourselves, whether you're pagan or not. You know, so much of why we hide really important things to ourselves that make us part of who we are, that are part of who we are, is because we're afraid people will reject us.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's like that quote from Dr. Seuss where he says, be yourself because those who mind don't matter and those who matter don't mind.
Right.
And it kind of comes to that, and it's only through that exposure that people start to come around to new ideas and new concepts. It's a great time to start being proud of who you are.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of that persecution is self-imposed,
Oh,
honestly.
absolutely, yeah.
My wife works at a very large corporation and is very out as a pagan. In her office, everything is, you know, there's pagan stuff all over the place. And one of her coworkers, who is also pagan, is so terrified of letting anybody know that she is pagan because she's afraid of losing her job. And you know, that just shows how a lot of times it's once we're able to really come out as an individual, do we realize that a lot of those fears of being rejected are really not factual.
Like arguing over the color of a unicorn horn. It never existed in the first place. Right. You know, a lot of that fear is our own fear that doesn't really exist. Yeah. And it's only through exposure that we realize it doesn't exist, or it does. You know, the fact is that some people might reject you, but are those the people you want around?
And the reality is that there is still some prejudice. And just like, you know, it wasn't necessarily an easy thing for a lot of people to come out of the closet as being gay, but it required that. Just like with the civil rights movement, just like with the suffrage movement, you know, for women to get the right to vote. I mean, all of those movements in society required people, even though they were going to be, you know, they were going to be discriminated against, to still step out and be present and be seen.
Okay.
All right.
So that's it for our show today. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
And blessed be.